Okay, we are now going to look at problem 4-21, and in this problem it's an architectural firm assigning cost to the various clients, and this is a very common practice in the service industry. For example, you would track your time if you're working in an accounting firm to bill your clients. You do the same thing if you're in a law firm, and so on. So the first requirement for this, so we're E4-21 and on page 231, and it continues to 232. So the first thing we're doing is looking at how they're currently calculating their allocation rate. So currently what they're doing, they're taking all of their overhead, which is $234, divide by the total of 10,000 hours that they expect to incur. So that's giving a rate of $23.44 per professional hour. So based on the current system, they are not breaking down their overhead into various activities. They're just taking all overhead, divide by the full total of the hours to come up with one rate. So using that approach, we'll see how this is allocated. So first of all, they have, for this particular kitchen remodeling job that they're tracking their cost on, they've spent 24 hours, and the hourly rate is $65 per hour, and you're given that information in the chapter. So when you are looking at the operating overhead, the operating overhead is based on the number of hours, professional hours. So you've used 24 hours. We've just calculated the overhead rate to be $23.40, so that will give you $561 in overhead. So the total cost that you're assigning to that job is $2,121.60. Now, if you're having a markup for this client of 35% markup, what you're doing here then is you're taking your cost and you're increasing it by 35 to come up with $2,864. So it's really important to get this number correct, because your revenue is impacted by the cost, because you're using cost plus. So you better make sure that you've identified the correct cost. So requirement 3, now we're moving to calculating what the overhead will be when you break it down by activity. So in this particular problem, we're told that overhead is really comprised of 3 main activities: transportation to the clients, your travel cost, the blueprint copying, and office support. And we're given the total cost of each of these main activities. So what we need to do is find out what the allocation rate is. So transportation, well, the allocation or the cost driver for that is going to be the number of kilometers driven. So 9,000 divided by 15,000 kilometers is 60 cents per kilometer. Blueprint copying, well, what would drive copying? The number of copies. So we have 1,000 copies. So 35,000 divided by 1,000, $35 per copy. Office support, it's $190,000, so the driver of office support is the number of secretarial hours, which is 5,000. 190 divided by your 5,000, $38,000 per secretarial hour. So now we know the rate. And it's also important when you are identifying your allocation base is that you take all of the activity for the year. So when you are looking at the 15,000, for example, that is comprised of 3,000 plus the 12,000. So you're looking at the total for this activity. The same thing for copies. We're told we have 300 plus the 700 for the different clients that you're working on. So it's the total number to come up with your rate per unit. Okay, so that was requirement 3. So now we're moving on to requirement 4 of this problem. And the fourth item we're asked to look at is the amount that you would bill to Amy Lee using activity-based costing. So we'll just scroll down and we'll look at, so here for this particular job, the time spent on it, that doesn't change. So your professional time, your labor hours, that doesn't change under either method. So the only difference is the actual overhead piece. So 24 hours times $65, $15.60. So now we have 3 components for our overhead. We have the kilometers, so 125 kilometers times 60 cents, so 75. Blueprints, 4 times $35 per copy, and our secretarial hours, which is 18 hours times your 38, so $684. So the overhead allocated here will be $899. And now we have a new cost base, and of course we're going to increase that by the 135% because that's our arrangement, that's our markup. And so now, in this particular instance, you would be billing the client $3,319.65. So you can see how the allocation of overhead based on each client's usage of that overhead would make a difference in the price that they're being charged. So if you had a client that was really close to your office and you know you're charging out, of course, your travel time, if you're only traveling 100 kilometers to get to one client versus 1,000 to get to another client, this is obviously going to make a difference on their overhead, and it's a fairer system. It's more transparent to the client, because if the overhead part of the bill is fairly large, and it is here, it's $899, it's a fair amount of money, so it's quite reasonable for the client to say, well, how did you come up with that overtime or with that overhead? So in that case you can say, look, you know, this is the distance to the office, this is what we're spending on photocopying the blueprints, you asked us for 4 copies, you know, so it makes the client aware as well. If they want frequent meetings, it's going to cost more if they're asking for those meetings to be held in person, if they're wanting more copies of things. All of this adds up, and I think it's a fairer system, and it makes sure that you're charging the client appropriately and the client understands why their costs are as high as they are. Okay, so that concludes requirement 4.